Hi everyone, this is your host, Greg Lamb. The featured play for this episode, Liana Asim's Brother Nat, will be performed at the New York Musical Festival this month, and it needs your help. If you'd like to contribute to this production, go to nymf.org/festival/2019 events/Brother Nat and find and hit that donate button. Also, I'd like to thank our new Patreon supporter, George Smart, for his support of the podcast. And lastly, the Asian American Playwright Collective, of which I am a part, is having its night of new play readings this Saturday, July 6th, at Woods Hole on Cape Cod. See my play and the work of 7 other Asian American playwrights as well, for free. See our Twitter account, @AAPCBoston, for more information.
Boston Podcast Players is supported by a grant from the Bob Jolly Charitable Trust.
Boston Podcast Players.
The story thus far.
Cast of characters.
Empress of
An
Rome.
entity or demon.
A run-of-the-mill Polish guy in his 40s.
Setting.
In a small hut
A
in the
long
city of
forgotten
Beijing.
era that lives both in the
Act
past.
1,
We
Scene 1.
create the
possible.
world with the stories we tell about
Act 1,
ourselves.
Scene
Because
2.
Steven, he could
Act
be anywhere,
1,
right?
Scene 3.
Don't give up the ship!
Cannon fire.
Bianca pushes the stop button. The end.
Welcome everyone to Boston Podcast Players, Boston's virtual podcast stage for new works by local playwrights. I'm Greg Lamb, the host of the show, and today I'm joined by today's guest co-host. How do we even say it? O'Neill Award-winning playwright, Laura Neill. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Greg. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So that just happened. You won the O'Neill Award, or is that even how you say it?
I'll be in residence at the National Playwrights Conference this summer.
Well, that is an incredible honor, and I'm glad to say I knew before when. And you also have other fairly major news in your life, right? We're about to lose you to Austin.
Yeah, well, I'll be a mobile playwright for the next couple of years, bouncing back and forth between New York, Boston, and Austin. And my partner, James Sanchez, is going to the Missioner Center. So we're very excited about that.
We wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
I asked you to name some playwrights when you said you were interested in co-hosting, to have featured on podcast. And one of the names you brought up was Liana Asim. What strikes you about her work?
So much. I first met Liana as an actor, actually, and Liana was reading a part in one of my plays, and I was struck by, first of all, how talented she is as an actor, and also that she is one of the smartest new play brains I've ever met in my life. And so then I found out, of course, that Liana is a playwright, and I was like, well, that makes sense, right? And of course, I wanted to find out more about her work. I was honored to be able to attend the constant reading of Brother Nat this October, and that really cemented my understanding of Liana's genius. So I'm very glad to be here today.
Great. And you mentioned Brother Nat, and that's our featured play today. It's actually not a play, but an opera. A sung-through opera about Nat Turner that Liana co-wrote with her husband, Jabari Asim. What would you like to say about the excerpt we're about to hear?
It's powerful, it's complex, it integrates a couple of different musical styles. I think opera is a really powerful form for this story because it's such a powerful story that hasn't been told as it should be. I'm really excited that Liana and Jabari are bringing it to the stage.
And the excerpt we're about to hear is from a full performance last fall that took place, I believe, at Emerson. And so I did not put this together on my own, as I do for most readings. This is a full production. There are 25 people on stage between singers and musicians, all very wonderfully dressed.
Brother Nat, tell us what's on your mind.
I was alone in the wood. I was dazzled. I was blind.
Very close again. Before I knock you to the ground, Nat, when you regained your sight, tell us what you found.
And angel came down and spoke directly to me. She gave me the sign that will set us all free. Rise up, she said, with your enemy's sword. Strike him down in the name of the Lord.
For pity's sake, what nonsense is this? We'll never be safe with him in our midst.
No one is safe when God is annoyed. No one is safe until evil is destroyed.
Nothing to lose.
When the angel calls, how can I refuse? She told me darkness would cover the sun. All of the clouds will roll into one. Night becomes day, and day becomes night. God expects us to stand up and fight.
Enough! Can't you tell that this is wrong? I think Nat has been crazy all along. I believe I've heard enough today. George and I will be on our way.
It's too late to run, it's already begun.
Our lives are in the Master's hands. We will die whenever he commands.
At least we won't die like flies. We'll meet again as angels in the bright and endless sky. My brothers, it's time for us to rise. It's time for us to rise. Day becomes night, and night becomes day. Gather the sinners and take them away. Stand up and seize your enemy's sword. Go forth as soldiers of the Lord. It's time to rise, it's time to rise. Our destiny rests in a higher power. This is how we'll do it, hour by hour.
Sweet Nat, I believe in you. Yet I must question what you plan to do. You want to go where no one should go. Killing's a sin, as we both know.
I only know what the Lord urges. A new and righteous self emerges to do his will.
I can't believe you'll kill.
I plan to do what the Lord directs. Children of God whom the Lord protects needn't fear me, but when I plan to fight, I'm gonna fight, and the sons of sin will hear me.
Nat, I'm not so sure.
I'm going to Canaan. Won't you come with me?
Wherever you are is where I want to be.
Together we'll face our destiny. The future's beyond just you and me. No one can say what tomorrow brings. Courage can give us so many things. Each day we pray for heavenly might, something to show us our struggle is right. Believing in you helps me survive. The strength of our faith keeps love alive. You look so sad, don't be afraid.
How could I not be when I think of you? Without me, this vision you've had, how could I be glad?
How can you question what Christ is?
Are you sure what the price is? A soul is no little thing.
I must serve Christ the King. This is the season where all fear must die. die. I'll risk my skin, my blood, my bone. If I have to, I'll do it alone.
You're never alone while I am here. I'm telling you, Nat, I can't help but fear that the day we speak of is drawing near.
Together we'll face our destiny. The future's beyond just you and me. No one can say what tomorrow brings. Courage can bring us so many things. Each day we pray for heavenly light, something to show us our struggle is right. Believing in you helps me survive. The strength of our faith keeps love alive. Our faith keeps love alive. The hunter stalks the lion, and the lion gets the story. The lion winds up dying, and the hunter gets the glory. A man runs to freedom. Freedom's what he's paid for, but they bring him back in irons because he's been bought and paid for. When my story finally ends, will they say that I stood tall? Will they tell it as it was? Will they remember me at all? Don't let them say I was a beast, more animal than a man. All I have done is listen and carry out God's plan. I'm just a humble servant. I'm not special, brave, or bold. I'm just a humble servant who's doing what he's been told. When my story finally ends, will they say that I stood tall? Will they tell it as it was? Will they remember me at all? At all? Get thee behind me, demon. Turn me loose, I say. Get thee behind me, devil, go away. Get thee behind me, demon. Turn me loose, I say. Get thee behind me. Devil, go away. Never mind one, here come two. Help me, Jesus, tell me what to do. Get thee behind me, demon. Turn me loose, I say. Get thee behind me.
Devil, go away.
Devil, go away.
Get thee behind me, demon. Turn me loose, I say. Get thee behind me.
Devil, go away.
Overcast overhead when normally it's sunny. Someone's played a joke on me, but I don't think it's funny. Something's out of line. The day grows old before its time.
When we began, the day was warm and bright and gold. But the wind has gathered strength and now it's gray and cold. It must be just afternoon. It shouldn't be dark so soon.
Something holy happening just above my head. There's a dark spot on the sun, and it's beginning to spread. Clouds churning around in space. I can't see my hands in front of my face.
Now is the time.
Now is the time.
The time is
The time is now. Is the time. Now is the time. The time is now. Gotta put it together somehow.
Our featured playwright today is Liana Asim. She's the author of many full-length plays, including musicals that she co-wrote with her husband. She was a Company One Playlab member and also a Company One Fellow in 2 separate years. Welcome to the podcast, Liana Asim.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
Now, first tell us about this incredible production we just heard. It seems to be the opera equivalent of a staged reading.
Yeah. So Jabari and I have been working on Brother Nat, for a while, and it was more of a sort of a hodgepodge bunch of poems, or that Jabari had something that he wanted to expand, and so we let it sit for a while and then pull it back out, and slowly I began to see structure, and then that's how I came into this piece, and then I sort of fill in the holes and make it into a play. First as dramaturg, and then as as co-librettist and book writer. And the exciting thing about
I was wondering about the division of labor between all the creative people. Who does what in there?
Jabari and I do a lot of finding proxies. It looks like this. It sounds like this when we're trying to shape things. So, and that's also how we found a lot of the talent. Boston has a lot of guerrilla-style opera, smaller, younger people who are producing pretty exciting, works here, pretty new, fresh, using new, fresh talent. When we were trying to figure out whether it was an opera or a something musical, and it's still kind of both. And so one of Jabari's favorite musicals of all time is Les Mis. And we both like epic stories. There's Nat Turner, the man, the historical fact, slave insurrection in 1831 in Virginia. And then culturally, there's a lot of mythology about him, that the person that they caught wasn't really him, and that he really escaped. And then there is this idea that the legend of him lives on culturally in our hearts, in our minds as people of descendants of slaves in America. In trying to capture all of that, opera sort of lends itself to epic, stories, epic tales, bursting out into song. So it's just sort of, felt right. And we wanted to do it now because there is this tangible feeling of resistance, of pushback, of we don't like this and we're going to take to the streets and change it. So I think that's why we've gotten a really good reception.
Yeah.
And where it really feels important to have it now.
Right. Mm-hmm. Should we go over a pocket history of Nat Turner for anyone who doesn't know the story?
So in Southampton County, Virginia, in 1831, on the plantation, so we set Brother Nat the story on the Turner plantation, but actually in history, he had already been sold to another plantation in the same area, in the same county. So it still wasn't the Turner family, but it was the Turner plantation was like nearby. So Nat was a slave who was considered a prophet. He could read the Bible. He was publicly a converted Christian and went around on neighboring plantations giving sermons and converting other slaves to Christianity. And the story goes that he was visited by an angel. And the angel said, look for a sign and a solar eclipse. There will be a black spot on the sun. And when you see that sign, rise up and slay your oppressors. So he did that. And in the aftermath of that event, he hid in a cave for 30 days afterwards. They didn't really find him. But the community slaughtered hundreds, I think it's almost 200 slaves, trying to find him or as a warning to other slaves. A lot of people think that, or would say that it was a failed rebellion, because after Nat Turner was caught, they had a trial. Of course, they pronounced him guilty, and then they hung him. It is believed that he was probably already dead, but there is this thing in Southern culture, in slave culture, where if you hang a man, you curse him to hell. That's part of that tradition. So it doesn't matter whether they've killed the slave already, killed the body already. The desire to hang them from a rope from a tree is to damn them forever. So thus the practice of lynching in the South. But our story, we suggest that Nat Turner repents, and that, as a Christian man would, and that he goes to heaven, which is slightly controversial in that sense. And a lot of people sort of view the story as an unsuccessful rebellion. In telling our own narrative, it really isn't, in the sense that the spirit of resistance is the success, because we exist. You could say that there could have been a possible, wiping all slaves out of existence, but we're still descendants of slaves, still exist. So the spirit of resistance sort of has ushered us here today.
Right.
Jabari and I don't consider it a failed rebellion, because we exist and we have 5 children and I have grandchildren, and that the spirit of Nat Turner lives on through us.
Yeah. And what would the alternative for Nat Turner be? to rebellion, just existing within the corrupt system.
Yes, allowing oppression to ultimately, win. Or I added this tagline sort of late in the process that against all odds, Nat Turner dared to rise above injustice, to revolt against oppression, and believe in the redemption of all humankind. That even if you have to struggle to get it, or you have to have some differences, or you have to have some conflict, on the other side, we can all be better human beings. And I think even though, that they had that violent revolt, I believe that Nat Turner never gave up believing that humankind could be better.
That's really powerful. And as you're thinking about this piece moving forward, what sorts of audiences do you want to see this play? If you could pick your ideal audience moving forward, who do you want to hear this story?
I would say it really needs to be an intergenerational audience. Mm-hmm. That would be ideal, because I think, I don't know politically if you've noticed that the people who are taking to the streets, there's this conversation in the civil rights movement community, is that the old heads, civil rights leaders, have a different way of doing things than how the young people have. And I guess this is necessary. The young people have to define who they are and sort of tear away from the older generation. But I think we would be remiss as a culture to not recognize or value the wisdom of that experience. And I think this particular piece, what young people feel that they can do and what their rights and what they're entitled to, that an older generation needs to hear it. Mm-hmm. So younger people are saying, I want to tell my story. I want to have revealed the multicultural beauty, grace, power of this country. But older, more, I would say, moneyed, maybe, traditional theater audiences are used to hearing different stories and are really comfortable in that. Mm-hmm. So hearing a story outside of their culture or outside of their experience and being in the room with younger audiences enriches both sides and sort of brings them together. And it's an aha moment for everybody to say, oh, this is what you're trying to say. And the younger people are like, yes, and you're finally here to listen. Mm-hmm. And now we need your support as we tell more multicultural stories, as we tell them in different styles. Everything doesn't have to have a European perspective or told in the way that Shakespeare tells a story or from the Western canon. There are other canons, and so I think that modern audiences that I'm hoping that Nat Turner is an opportunity to sort of see both sides of the coin. It's history, but it's still a new and fresh point of history that has not had this kind of platform. Mm-hmm.
I can't think of many cultural depictions of Nat Turner.
Yeah, and if you just take so one of the things I found really interesting in doing the dramaturgy for this was one of the characters is named Armfield, and he's named after a real character, John Armfield. And what I learned about him is that he actually did his own Trail of Tears with slaves because he wanted to make a big payday. So he rounded up some folks in Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina, and rounded up enslaved people and marched them all the way to Louisiana. Of course, that took a very long time, and lots of people died, and he got a very big payday at the end of it. And so he didn't care how he got those bodies. He snatched people off the road at night, bargains, and got as many bodies because he wanted this really big, payday. It made me think about the indigenous Trail of Tears story that we try to ignore or refuse to acknowledge in a way. So,
or just distance themselves in the past. Well, that's a long way away. That doesn't apply now.
Like it's right, yes. But what would happen in the theater if this experience was put on stage just magnificently? and just with viewing it from the point of view, not just the facts, but the spiritual point of view, because there is, I think often, and maybe because I'm a person of color, this is my perspective, I'll admit to that. I think that often our stories have not just, we don't present the facts, we also have a spiritual element to it, that it's important for our work to have a spiritual element to it, and that it gets relegated to, our faith practices get relegated to mythology. And so we refer to the faith practices of indigenous people as Native American mythology. But that put on the stage would just give theater community, a theater audience, a greater awareness of the pain of that experience, but also the strength of that experience and why these people still survive and thrive and flourish now. And so I think every culture in America should have that experience, because the arts are built on tax dollars and every person pays taxes. So what if the arts world reflected the money that goes into tax? The people who put that money there, which is everybody. You can't escape it. You can't escape taxes. You pay sales tax. You pay, I don't want to start on that.
Unless you're rich enough that you can park your money somewhere that doesn't collect taxes.
Yes.
I love that you bring up this idea, obviously, which is very important to Brother Nat, of faith, right? And this spiritual dimension. And one of the things that really struck me when I heard Brother Nat was the different views of Christianity and what faith means within the piece, right? You have these white people, right, who are using Christianity to justify the terrible actions they're doing, and then you have Brother Nat who's rising up and using Christianity and his faith to rise up. Can you talk a little bit more about how those are woven into the piece and how you decided to bring that forward?
So this is actually a debate, my husband and I, have a lot, because I was raised in the Pentecostal church, and my husband is actually Buddhist. So he has this idea of that Christianity was like forced down the throats of slaves, and that it's this subservient thing. And my concept is very different. I'm the first generation born above the Mason-Dixon line. So all of my kinfolk lived in the Mississippi area, in the southern area. So they're not that far removed from the southern plantations where they were, and our ancestors were enslaved. And because they were congregated in that area, we are aware of and can chronicle to where they lived even 6 generations back to the first generation after slavery, who practiced and created a church in a little shack in the South. So I have a different perspective in that. So the faith was used the Bible was used to teach people how to read in a stealth way. It was a safe way to show up with a book that was acceptable, but while they were in so you would verbally tell the story in a very dramatic way, and then you teach the person how to read the story. So you introduce it verbally, you introduce it orally, and then afterwards, after hearing it repeatedly, and then the people would go home and they would tell it to their children orally, and then it was easier to go back and show them how the words correlated with the stories that they already knew by heart. So for me, what the faith was, it had like it's a political, subversive thing. It's like that was in plain sight. I don't really have that perspective. I also know that, like during my research, slaves often went out into a clearing to practice their faith. And so there's this thing that they often did called the ring shout. And so it's kind of like, shuffling, in a circle, and then you reverse it and you clap and sing. And that the roots of that particular thing is actually from a Muslim tradition, Muslim religious tradition. But it was simple enough that white people looking on could not tell, did not know, because of their ignorance. They were able to sneak in. There are different faith practices from Africa. So there are more African religious traditions within the way Black people practice Christianity than outsiders know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of Christianity that we practice, or that I grew up practicing. So for Brother Nat, there's this duality going on. And all of the slaves is sort of coded language and coded action. So they give the appearance of doing something that's acceptable on the plantation. But at the same time, they have this other agenda. So there is a scene where Nat actually teaches one of the slaves how to read from the Bible. It's a conversation. It's sort of how he converts. And it's like, the reason why you don't get it is because you can't read it for yourself. Mm-hmm. When you read it for yourself, then you'll be able to know. Or there's a song that didn't make it into the October concert version, where Nat comes out and says, "Get up. We don't kneel. Stand up, while we pray. Realize your full humanity. Stand for God." So all of these little revelations, I hope, that when people see it, I hope that it will sort of change the perspective of how an outside culture perceives how we practice our faith. Because if you think that you're using religion as a thumb on somebody's head, even when you're not even if you're not conscious of that attitude, it takes time to correct. So I go to a mixed church. So I know that there is genuine, love and community in integrated, environments. At the same time, I do know that my concept of how I practice Christianity is different, and it was shaped by. So Nat sort of explodes that notion of, we practice it. Yeah, we read the same Bible, but it means something different to us. Interesting. Freedom means something different to us. Freedom does not mean we oppress another human being. Mm-hmm. Freedom to us, love is expressed in another way. But we are in this situation, we're going to let Master Turner think that he has dibs on God, so we can make it to a better day. Mm-hmm.
So what was one of the most interesting or surprising reactions you got from the last October's performance that you heard?
I was so shocked when people stood up and applauded appreciatively. I almost cried. And I was like, "Oh, get yourself together, Liana. You got to go up and say something." It's when you tell a story about a revolt. I thought that maybe people might be just a little miffed by it, or that you're stirring things up. And it wasn't. It was accepting. It was, I want to hear, like my neighbor came, and when I asked him what he thought about it, he's like, I wanted to hear more about Nat. Mm-hmm. I wanted to hear, how he was shaped. How did he come to this kind of thinking? How did he transform from a man of peace to a man of bloodshed?
Revolution.
Yeah. And I was like, And I kind of took that I took that for granted. So in my next rewrite, which I'm in the midst of, now, I'm trying to give, I think there's a little bit of Nat in all of us, but it's, do you feel comfortable letting it out? So from that audience, I realized that they kind of sided with Nat, which was surprising. But it matches with the idea that this is the right time. It's I had a patron say that the air, this is his words, the air is crackling with mutiny. And he's an older white gentleman, an ex-journalist, late 60s. And I was like, wow, that is perfect. That during this time, that the air is actually crackling.
Do you want to talk about the next step for the opera?
Yes. So after the concert was over, everybody's like, "Oh, what are you gonna do next?" So it's submit. And of course, they say that in Play Lab, and that's what we talk to each other about as a community of playwrights. Great, submit next. So I submitted a bunch of places. It was rejection. One more rejection. Then the New York Musical Festival reached out, and It's like, oh, okay. And I really hadn't taken into account all that it required, because I was trying to submit blindly, and I mean just without any attaching any real meaning to it, or I would have talked myself out of it. So I was just, while I'm in mode, just submit. Mm-hmm. And I love Patric who is the king of submitting, but he was like, that's how you get produced. And so I've heard him talk about it several times, and his system and how elaborate it is, and how many times he submitted something, how many times people have said no, but he just sends it out again. So I did have his example, his thoughts, the Play Lab's thoughts, the urging in my head after this process, that that's what I was going to do. And so when this opportunity came, and then they started to reveal what was required, the New York Musical Festival, they give you a space, and they give you, staff to run the space, so you don't have to think about that. But you do have to raise funds to produce the work yourself. Mm-hmm. And first they asked me to consider doing a full production, and I'm like, lights and costumes? No, I'm not ready for that yet. And also because the cast is so large. It's like 19 people, a 10-member orchestra. And I said, I think it needs some more crafting before that phase. And so I wanted an opportunity to nitpick. And what was really inviting about opting to do the developmental reading series is the dramaturg. And so my dramaturg, his name is Walter Beyonce. He is a professor at Ithaca College. Boy, did he ask some great questions. I was like, hadn't thought of that. Oh, hadn't thought of that. Nope, hadn't thought of that either.
This is all since the October reading?
Yes. So he gave a really close read and asked questions, that were about structure, but also just from an outsider's perspective. The thing about doing like the collaborative process is so intimate. You're like, oh, the people who are doing it, you're all cheering. Oh, that sounds good. Oh, that's darn good. Oh, that is a really great song. It's useful because you need that upbeatness, but you need that third eye. So he is a great third eye. So I'm in the midst of the rewrites, in the midst of answering his questions about the characters, and also some of the good things that he said about it. It's like, oh, this works. This does work as comedy. Like the Lillian character who talks about her role as being mistress of the plantation. Mm-hmm. He was like, it's unexpected comedy. I was like, that was my intention, and I did hear people laugh, but I was still kind of funny about it. I was like, does it fit? He was like, yes, leave it. It fits. Sometimes you just need someone else to say, yeah, keep that. That process right now is very rewarding, and also fits in with, I don't want to give up an opportunity, but I don't want to be rushed too, because I have long-term goals, and you just want it to be someone who will take it and burnish it, so that it glimmers, that it shines. And so that's what I feel like this next step will be. It's just like, let's shine it up. Let's like nitpick every scene. Is this verse superfluous? I'd like to get the time tight on it. No, it shouldn't be 3 hours. I'm new to the game. I want it to be produced. And that's why Laura is such a great example. The way she plots and structures is she's really good at it. It's superior plotting and structuring, So lots to learn from her example and sitting in her, not just being an actor in the readings of her plays, but it's watching how the last play I saw of hers, was it Winter People?
We had a workshop at BBC.
Yeah, and so when there was a revelation, there were several people in the audience who went, oh, so you got it. It's really great when more than one person can see what you meant, get a real response. So I can always, I have that example, from her style, from her work, from her playwriting excellence. And that's the great thing about this community too. Mm-hmm. I pick up really good nuggets from the playwriting community. One, I'm receptive to hear what they have to say about my work. But not just that.
Just viewing other people's work.
Yeah. and other women as well. So I feel just really blessed to be a part of the Boston community at this time. I don't know. I've only been here about 9.5 years, and I jumped in 2014. After I took a playwriting class in Emerson. I was whining before that, and my husband was like, "Babe, you get to take one free class a semester. Stop whining and take a class." And so I did, and once I began to talk about the work, people actually listened and invited me into things and say, "Oh, you can workshop it here. You can apply to this. Did you hear about that?"
So did you not write plays before 2014?
I'm a mother of 5.
Wow.
So years ago, Duane and I are from the Midwest and we used to live in St. Louis. So the first 9 years of our marriage, we lived there. And I co-founded a small theater with 7 other women called the Pomoja Theater Workshop. So I did that for 7 or 8 years. And then I had babies and more babies and more babies. And that was my creating. And on the other side of it, I still had some brains left. So when we moved to Boston, it felt like finally time to kind of get back to that.
As a parent of a young daughter, I'm glad there is brains left on the end of that. Yes. And other people were encouraging, other working moms. That's a really great thing about Boston, and the people will work on something for 20 years and start a new career. So there really haven't been any Debbie Downers. They're like, yes, you can do it. Or a really great quote that I think of from a mom who went back to work and working on her dreams is she said, sometimes it will feel like an uphill battle, but it is just preparing you to take flight. And so I was like, oh, yes. Thank you for that. It's so I'm going to remember that when I'm in the uphill battle, that at the end of this, I will take flight. So that's the spirit I'm trying to bring to going to New York, producing your own show with all of these people. Is that this is a part of the taking flight. These are little feathers in my wings.
It's such a gorgeous and powerful, epic story that you're making. You're already in flight.
Oh, thank you. See, that is representative of the encouragement of being a part of the Boston playwriting community. You get little nuggets of inspiration and encouragement everywhere. Christina, I don't think...
We're talking Christina Chan, whose house we're currently recording in.
Yes. I think she makes it to most, if not all. I haven't had that many readings, but I see her in the audience, and she always says something encouraging, at the end. And I really appreciate that.
We're trying to put the spotlight on as many playwrights as we can from Boston, at least in this podcast. Let's talk about the rest of your oeuvre. I see that you've written plays about Abraham Lincoln and Marilyn Monroe, and The King of Love is Dead was about the civil rights movement of 1968. Is examining different parts of history a part of your outlook as a playwright?
Yeah, that's my thing. I really get, I don't know, I'm a voyeur in that sense. I don't peek into people's houses, but I feel like when I'm reading
historian / voyeur.
Yeah, I get really curious. So that Abraham Lincoln play, I was actually doing some research on Marilyn Monroe, and I read that she kept a picture of Abraham Lincoln next to her bed. It's a surrogate father image. For some reason, I did a detour, started looking up stuff on Abraham Lincoln, and there was one line that I read that said Abraham Lincoln slept in the same bed with a man for 4 years, I think. And I was like, really? How come I didn't know about this? Joshua Fryspeed was the name of the person. Then when I read more, there was this, a historian suggested that something happened in January, possibly New Year's Day, in I want to say it's 1841, so it's January 1st, 1840 something. And that they vowed, Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Fryspeed vowed never to write about it and discuss it. I was like, whoa. And then, and it further noted that Abraham Lincoln may have possibly tried to commit suicide. He had melancholia. So he had deep bouts of melancholia for long periods of time. I was like, so what could it be? What could that have been? Then the more I read that, people, his friends, they didn't like Mary Ann Todd. They thought, she was annoying, social climber. I was like, I like Mary Ann Todd. What's wrong with people? She was smart, she knew about politics. She felt really comfortable talking in the company of men, but she was a daddy's girl. So that sort of contributed to it. I was like, I can see that. A really smart woman during that time who was well educated, and her daddy continued her education beyond finishing school. I could see how other men wouldn't like her. So I imagined what that day would have been like for Abraham Lincoln and what would have driven him to suicide. And before he married her, first he dumped her, and then they got back together. And at some point. And so I make it all happen on that day. And that after he dumps Mary Ann Todd, after Joshua Fryspeed encourages him, talks him into dumping Mary Ann Todd, when he comes back and he's like, okay, I did it. Then Joshua Fryspeed says, and by the way, I'm leaving. I'm selling the general store, because that's where they lived. They lived above the general store that Joshua Fryspeed owned. And I'm marrying my childhood sweetheart back in Kentucky. And I thought, when that came to me, I was like, yes. Because if they had been deep friends, if they had, Lincoln referred to Joshua Fryspeed as his most intimate companion, the person that he had shared his secrets with, that he had possibly matured with as a person, because he was becoming, quite a political speaker. From the research that I did about him, he needed comfort, because his upbringing was so rough. And he was also a person who lived in sort of more than one realm, one plane. He was always connected, never far from death. It was never far from his memory or his heart, the death of his mother, the death of a woman that he was deeply in love with, that he possibly might have been responsible for her death. He had one of those, fevers, those plagues that wipe people out. He had the plague first, the fever first. She nursed him. He lived. Then she caught it, and she died.
Wow.
So he had that grief, and he was just a person who, could weep at the beauty of a flower. So I thought, okay, so in this environment, he's safe, he was warm. But anyway, meditating on all of that, it was just inspired from one sentence. And so I really get giddy and happy and nerdy about a sentence out of history, and just imagine, all
what
this
if
happened.
And this plays on the new Play Exchange, right, Liana? If anybody wants to read it, look it up.
It is. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, it is on the new Play Exchange. And Marilyn Monroe, I feel just a kinship to her in the sense that, she was Zaftig. And I haven't always been Zaftig, but that idea of sort of feeling like a misfit and trying to make it happen, make it go beyond people's impressions of you. So just the more I've explored her story, I haven't figured out yet. So the draft that I have, I'm still trying to figure out what it is I want to do for her. And so I'm discussing writing a draft.
Options, so many different angles you can do.
It is. I learned about her and Ella Fitzgerald, and I was trying to find a civil rights moment story in her life. And so Marilyn Monroe actually spoke up for Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald was trying to get into a club in California that was called, I think, the Macombo. And the owner, for whatever reason, did not want her in the club. And so Marilyn Monroe, who was a fan, called the guy up and said, if you let Ella perform at this club, and have a real engagement at this club, I'll bring all my friends. And he was like, and you'll bring Frank too? And she's like, yes, I will bring Frank too. Frank Sinatra. And we'll all, we'll sit up front and cheer, and I'll bring them every night, the engagement. He was like, bet, she can have a slot. And after then, she was allowed to be in more clubs, integrate more, clubs. And I thought there is, and when I discovered that, Marilyn Monroe, I think it's the movie about where she wears the gloves and she wears the pink. It's some kind of diamonds are a girl's. Gentlemen prefer blondes. Oh. So she sings in that, and the director decided to get her to be more comfortable. He gave her an Ella Fitzgerald album, and he said, "Practice singing like she sings." Practice, and so Marilyn Monroe learned how to sing, perform, her style, her cadence from listening to Ella Fitzgerald, so that she could make it through. And it makes sense when I listen to it. I was like, I can kind of hear that. And it seems unlikely that would be inspiration, or I wouldn't have thought of it. Yeah. Anyway, so I plan to do something with that material. Maybe even make it an opera, which is odd. But I had a friend, I have a composer friend, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do together. And we might do something with that.
And you're also working on a piece about Bessie Smith, right?
Oh my gosh! Yes, I love Bessie Smith. I have been just blessed to be a part of, just this year, the Rhombus Playwrights group. I am workshopping this Bessie Smith play that I finished, and just didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then I got a note from Alexa
Mattis?
Yes, Mavra Mattis, to say, hey, are you available? We have some people cycling out. You want to cycle in and work with Rhombus, for a little bit? And I was like, oh, it so fits in with my playwriting goals. Again, just the Boston community coming to help me when I needed it most. And just to be in the company of other playwrights who, they give you criticism, but it's golden. You know what I mean? It's said in the right spirit. It's useful. I take so many notes, and it's about craft and about techniques. And did you think of this? Or did you, think of that? Or did you think of repeating this theme? Very, very useful. Very useful. So, and Bessie Smith, the musicals that I've seen about her in the past are like jukebox musicals. But, Bessie Smith is also known for almost single-handedly bringing Columbia Records out of receivership, out of bankruptcy, because of her sales. And because of their corruption, too, as well. Because she came from the tradition, you sing, you get paid. So that idea of royalties wasn't a concept for her. So what they did was, they paid her really well. You come into the studio, we'll pay you really well. You go on tour, you get paid really well. But they took the lion's share of her royalties. And that allowed them to come out of bankruptcy. Because they were competing with wireless or radio. And losing, sales. And Bessie Smith had a different kind of distribution system, which Frank Walker, who was the rep at Columbia, knew about, because he was the kind of rep who would go anywhere, Appalachian Mountains. He saw her at a juke joint in Selma, Alabama, in a gin house in Selma, Alabama, like when she was really young, because he wasn't afraid to do that. And so he paid attention to how they sold records. And so Bessie Smith, this is one of the ways that she would sell records. Like the Pullman porter would come into a town and they would buy the records when they came out. And so every stop that they made, they had like a boy there. So they were like, okay. So they'd buy them for one price and sell them for another in the towns where they didn't have like records stores. And then they'd be sold at the barber shop. They would be sold at the juke joint. And so these were places that normal distribution didn't take place. So sort of underground distribution stations. And that's how Bessie Smith made made her wealth and also brought Columbia Records out of receivership.
I don't know if you noticed, but we've been talking for almost an hour now.
Oh, okay.
I'm just thinking if there are any last topics you want to hit before we start closing.
Is there anything you want to say about this relationship between writing plays, writing musicals, writing opera? Like, do you think that one form is more evocative for you for certain stories, and what are you planning on writing more of going forward, if you know?
I have this thing about writing these large stories and the 30 people in the cast, and so it makes it difficult to produce them. And so I go back and forth on whether I should write some smaller stories. So I plan on writing some smaller stories, but I also my husband and I went on a field trip. We went to see the Lehman trilogy, and so the Lehman trilogy tells the life of the three Lehman brothers who made the financial institution that collapsed back in 2008. But the story is told by only 3 actors. They were amazing. And so I think that soon one of my next endeavors will be to tell a large story with a handful of actors. It will require a lot of the actors, but I think Boston's got that talent that that could happen. I also want to do a one-woman show. Yes. So I think I finally have the courage, the nerve, maybe even the audience or the following to try that. I have this thing about, there's a historical character that I want to do, but the thing that I want to do first is about the story of Mary as she followed Christ to the cross. Everybody talks about, Christ's turn, of course. But I always go, and where was his mama? And what was she doing? She was having her own personal death, as that went on. And there was very little that she could do. So I'm going to play and tell her perspective from a believer, because there's already a play like that, but it's from the perspective of someone who's not a believer. So my side is from a believer, and I want to play the Pharisees. I want to play the crowd. I want to do all those parts.
You want to be the whole Bible.
Yeah.
They can do it.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. Thank you.
One thing I hope happens is that people who listen to the podcast will actually look into working with the future playwrights. And so with that, the traditional last question, what is the phone call you'd most like to get from someone listening to this podcast?
I'd like to be an artist in residence somewhere. I know the idea of course, I want a play produced somewhere, but I'd like a home, so that when I wake up and I write like 3 scenes, that I can bring it in or discuss things with, my ideas with, and probably something that sort of mimics my life as a mother and wife of artists. All my kids are artsy. My husband is artsy, so we talk about art all the time. So I'd like for my work life and the people that I'm around the most I'd like to have that relationship with them. So I think an artist in residence, and then through that, of course, get produced. But yeah.
All right, well, if you have a residence and you want an artist there, contact Liana. Thank you for listening to another episode of Boston Podcast Players. Everyone, support new plays and support local playwrights.
This performance of Brother Nat, Rise, Revolt, Redemption, was recorded at Emerson College in concert in October 2018. Book and lyrics by Liana and Jabari Asim. Music by Alyssa Jones and Damian L. Sneed. The cast includes Duane Adolph Moody, Sirgourney Cook, Lovely Hoffman, Neal Ferreira, Mark Linehan, Joshua Brian Campbell, James Dargan, Christina DeVaughn, Todd McNeel, Katie O'Reilly, Tiniqua Patric, Pier Lamia Porter, Nathan Rodriguez, Carolyn Saxon, and Jermaine Tulloch. Follow us on Twitter at BossPodPlay and on Facebook. Please rate us on iTunes or your podcast player of choice. You can support us on Patreon at BossPodPlay. Our theme was composed by Thomas Deus, thomasdeusmusic.com. Additional music by bensound.com. Other than yourself, do you know of a Boston area playwright who you'd like to be featured on the show? Let us know at bosspodplay@gmail.com.